And respected friends, thank you so much for joining today's Swadhyaya Chakra dialogue. So, as following our tradition, we will start our session with an invocation of a song. So, let me just share the screen, please. Thank you so much for your kind attention. We welcome you on behalf of Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Listening to our following symposium on the very topic, democracy and equality in contemporary India. It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Ajit Pandey sir from Department of Sociology, Banaras Hindu University. To present discussants view, we are honored to have Professor Anand Kumar, eminent social scientist from India. We will be joined by Dr. Ajit Paul from University of California, Berkeley. We will be soon joined by Professor Badri Narayan from Govind Ballabh Pant Social Science Institute, Allahabad. And the session will be moderated by Professor Anand Kumar Giri, professor from Madras Development Institute. Let me also give a brief introduction to our Swadhyaya Chakra. Swadhyaya Chakra is a circle of co-learning and mutual studies. It is an initiative of studying and learning together self, culture, societies, and the world. Friends associated with this are eager to walk and mediate with new horizons of thinking, new movements of social cultural change at work in our contemporary world. We study seekers such as Sri Aurobindo, Mahatma Gandhi, Chittaranjan Das, a seeker and creative thinker from Orissa, and many others from around the world. We also present our own writings and reflect upon our creativity together. We also invite seekers from different fields of life to share with us their lives, vision, sadhana, and struggle for creating a world of beauty, dignity, and dialogue. We meet every Sunday, and we have now collaboration with different institutions in India and abroad. Further ado, I would like to invite Professor Anand Kumar, our mentor, Professor Anand Kumar Giri, to kindly give the introductory remark of today's symposium. So over to you.
Thank you so much, dear Randhir, and thank you, Professor Ajit Pandey and Professor Anand Kumar, for being co-present with us, not only in this symposium, but as part of their continued engagement in understanding, and I hope making a contribution to transforming the apathetic condition of democracy and equality in contemporary India. It is always helpful to have a little bit of longer perspective and another perspective to understand the situation, the contemporary condition of democracy and equality in India. So it is in that spirit, as I was preparing to join us in this mutual exploration, I was thinking of Alexis de Tocqueville. And Tocqueville is not only a theoretician of democracy of America, we all would acknowledge the key significance of democracy in America for democratic experiments all over the world, including its limitations. So it is in this context, I wish to take around 10 minutes or so of making an introductory presentation on democracy and equality in India, working and meditating with Alexis de Tocqueville as a prelude. And we can realize that some of the challenges that Tocqueville had experienced in his engagement, encounter with democracy in America, how they are still present, not only in democracy in America, contemporary America, but also contemporary India. So we are blessed to have Professor Pandey's presentation, and then enriched by Professor Anand Kumar's presentation and discussion, it seems our two other friends, Badrinarayan and Ajit, may not be able to join us. I have contacted them, and it seems they may not be able. So in terms of flow of time, as we have another meeting also at 6:30, I would take up to 10 minutes or so. Then I request Professor Pandey to take around 30 minutes or so, or 25 to 30 minutes, if it is okay. And Professor Anand Kumar, around 15 minutes, and then we would have our discussions, please. So I would like to share this screen, Ranjit, if you can kindly allow me.
Yes, you can see.
I hope you can see this screen now.
Yes.
So when we talk about Alexis de Tocqueville, we have to remember that when Tocqueville wrote about democracy in America, he also wrote a very important volume, a rather an ethnographic volume on prison systems in America. So therefore, the challenge is that we to remember that Tocqueville's construction of democracy in America was also, influenced by his observation of the condition of prisons in America. Therefore, Ronald Walters, a very thoughtful cultural historian of the USA, who was teaching at the Johns Hopkins University, where I was a student, and I had a course with him on American history. And he writes, even so, there is irony in the fact that Tocqueville came here to study the wonderful ways in which America incarcerated human beings, not how democracy freed them. And this is a very important challenge for democracy. And in contemporary America, we know that a great number of population of America among societies from all over the world, the highest number of population are imprisoned in America. And that too, most of them are Afro-Americans. So if we bring it to contemporary India also, there is a link between democracy and imprisonment. We know that Professor Anand Kumar is with us, and many of our friends in the field of human rights, namely Anand Teltunde and Gautam Nabalika. What crime they have committed? Father Stan Swami. So he died in the prison, whether he was killed in the prison. So therefore, the link between democracy and imprisonment and our continued contestation and struggle over sedition law. So Tocqueville's work on both prison system in America and democracy suggests important clues to us to understand the challenge before democracy in contemporary India. And then Tocqueville came to study the prison system, to prepare a report on American prison system. And there he found that how the prison system uses the principle of isolation in one place and another on labor. And both isolation and labor creates a condition, again, as Walter writes, to some extent there was a tie between Tocqueville's interest in American jails and his assessment of American democracy. The most striking characteristic of the penitentiary system that drew the interest of the French was its use of extreme measures, including enforced silence and solitary confinement. And we see that in India also these two instruments are used to silence dissent against the functioning of democracy. We can just remember what has happened in the last 2 to 3 years and how people been put into prison. And moving on, that it is in this context, Tocqueville finds that what are the pillars of American democracy? One is association, both political association and civic religious association. And these civic religious associations, they were not really putting forward fundamentalist religious practice, but they really drew upon their associational character in religion, especially in New England, to build a culture of association, which would support the growing democracy. And building on that, American sociologist and thinker Robert Bellah spoke about civil religion. So that also points to another crucial aspect of democracy, that religion. And Tocqueville speaks about how there is sometimes a religious fanaticism. But when he was talking about religious fanaticism, he didn't have in mind the kind of challenges that we saw recently in the last 50 years, and especially during Donald Trump and others, and how the conservative right mobilized themselves. Not only that, by religious fanaticism, he had that how Americans are much more prone to a kind of religious sentiment compared to the Europeans. And Tocqueville also makes this comment that this kind of religious fervor, which sometimes border on mysticism, and that is a counter to American preoccupation with materialism. But the theme of religion, secularism, and religious fervor, it is also a challenge that confronts both democracy in contemporary USA, democracy in contemporary India. So we see what is happening today in terms of remarks on Prophet Muhammad, peace be unto him, and all the challenges of intolerance, bigotry. Professor Anand Kumar, as part of Society of Communal Harmony, has been really confronted with this challenge, and many of our friends like Horst Mandar and others. Moving on, Tocqueville challenges us to realize the significance of judiciary. In the working of American democracy, Tocqueville attributes great importance to the power of the judiciary. And he writes, few laws can escape the searching analysis of the judicial power for any length of time. Now, if this is the challenge and what Tocqueville saw around 1830s, now what is the condition of judiciary in contemporary USA? We see that how partisan judiciary has become, like the appointment to the Supreme Court of the USA. You see how what kind of partisanship has been at work, and the same challenge before judiciary in India in terms of partisanship. And in the last 5 years, and only Chief Justice Ramana has given us some fresh wind, some fresh breeze to have trust on the judiciary. But the searching analysis of the judicial power that Tocqueville is pointing to, yet we are going to have a test of it, because the executive dissolution of existing rules like Article 370 in Kashmir, and it is still after 2 years has passed, and the judiciary is silent on this crucial question, and we are going to have a presidential election just after a month, and our brothers and sisters of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, they are not going to be able to participate in this presidential election. So moving on, another theme that Tocqueville points to is the problem of tyranny. And he writes, I do not say that tyrannical abuses frequently occur in America at the present day, but I maintain that no sure barrier is established against them. And that tyranny, the tyranny of the majority is something that haunts, that annihilates democracy, both in India and America. And what is the root of that? Very briefly, I would like to point to Tocqueville's discussion of individualism. He's saying that democratic societies have a tendency to create individualism. But this individualism also makes people alone. And in a way, they are like the prisoners in a prison system. And this aloneness, this solitariness of individualism makes them vulnerable to the power of numbers. And here Tocqueville's arguments are very complex. And time being short, very briefly, I would like to present a few things here. Tocqueville says that in democracy in America, there is more emphasis on so-called equality than liberty. And that means freedom. And he also makes a distinction between equality in liberty and equality in slavery. He says that because people in the name of equality are really interested in competition, not so much as equality as fraternity or conditions of equality, or what Ronald Dworkin, a latter-day American legal philosopher, makes a distinction between equality as a right and equality as a policy. But with Dworkin, we need to think about not only equality as a right, equality as a policy, but equality as a practice. So, but Tocqueville's use of the phrase equality in slavery is deeply instructive. And here, a commentator of Tocqueville, he makes a distinction between aristocratic individualism in Tocqueville and apathetic individualism. And Tocqueville's critique of the numbers, the tyrannical majority, and how democracy is always confronted with the problem of tyrannical majority, or what Ortega Gasset, the Spanish philosopher, put in his epochal work, The Revolt of the Masses. There, Gasset is making a distinction that how democracy is becoming beholden to the kind of the illogical logic of the masses or illogical violence of the crowd. And here, Gasset challenges us to understand the significance of the aristocratic. The aristocratic in the sense of those people who have the aristocratic temperament to stand up to the violence of the crowd. It is to be understood in that sense, not in the sense of hereditary aristocracy. But coming back to the tension in democracy, not only between liberty and equality, but also there are two kinds of individualism. Tocqueville talks about equality in liberty and equality in slavery. Professor André Bete, who builds on the Tocquevillian mode of engagement, he makes a distinction between individualism of equality and individualism of inequality. And here he builds on George Simmel. So my submission is that therefore, when we confront the challenge of democracy via the challenge of equality and inequality, as Professor Bete points to two kinds of relationship between individualism and equality, he's here thinking along with Louis Dumont, and he's challenging that individualism is not always being accompanied by equality. Similarly, we can say democracy is not being always being accompanied by equality. There is a democracy of equality, which is a far, far goal now in India and everywhere, because today what we find is a democracy of inequality, the rising inequality. The economic inequality, Joseph Stiglitz, Amartya Sen, and all commentators on contemporary economic condition, they are challenging us to realize this as our own experience of democracy and equality in India, how public resources are being sold at a peanut price to a few corporations, Adanis and Ambanis, and what they are doing to democracy. Therefore, the distortion that economic inequality is bringing to democracy. And finally, I just wish to present a poem very quickly, which goes like this. K Street in DC is the street of money. I once found a $50 bill. You can find it only in K Street. Somebody with a suitcase of money on the way to grease a politician's palm may have dropped it there. How far L and M, P are from K and M? L for Loka and P for people. Loka Sangraha and people's democracy. L and P are now very far from K and M. So are J and L, Jefferson and Lincoln, R and E, Roosevelt and Eleanor, K and G, King and Gandhi. How do K and M embrace L and P, K and G, R and E in a radical days of transformation, a turning point in consciousness? So with this, I most cordially invite Professor Ajit Pandey to kindly make his presentation.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, please.
Yes. First of all, I express my great thanks to Professor Anand Giri and the organizer, Dr. Randhir Sahab, and my senior, super senior, Professor Anand Kumar Sahab, who could manage to spare time for these discussions. First of all, I beg my apology if any of my facts will come out in course of my presentation of the paper that I have come along with. Today, I'm speaking on democracy and equality in our contemporary India. This talk of mine will be divided into two parts. The first portion, I'll dwell upon the theoretical ideas confining to some of the political thinkers. And second, I'll come back straight to the Indian situations where, on the basis of my experiences and some of the studies conducted by some great scholars, I like to portray the situations that we confront today insofar as the democracy and equality in India is concerned. So first of all, I start the theoretical portions of my discussions. Of late, in recent years, we are witnessing, or perhaps we have witnessed already the decline of socialism as a motivating ideology and as an eminent utopian model. Most of the, I believe, in the 1950s and 60s, people were much referring to the terminology or the ideas of socialism. And to me, socialism at the moment no longer engenders a romantic image of classless, stateless society or a workers' democracy. No stage of communism is envisioned in the impending future. Once again, I say, I may say so, these kinds of words that I'm coming out with. The realities of government power, bureaucratic inefficiency, and authoritarianism and the class divisions linked to the new technocratic economy overshadow the once bright vision of socialist utopian future at the moment. Romantic socialism is dead. Once again, if I may say so, it is killed by the power of a state, the modern state. It is also, to me, it appears annihilated by the authoritarian tendencies of bureaucracy. It also appears to be strangulated by the inefficiency of centralized, bureaucratized economy. And finally, it appears to be totally finished by its abandonment of the enlightened political principles of law, the limitations and separation of powers, and open electoral participations. The decline of romantic socialism has saved all of us from the now apparent political and economic dangers of despotic statism and inefficient bureaucratic economy. This is what Professor Anand Giri was at the moment mentioning in his communications. However, the decline of socialism has also left us with an ideological vacuum and a moral dilemma. The questions that currently disturb our minds are 3-4 questions that come to my mind. Number one is, what becomes of the quest for equality and ethic of social justice? Number second, 2 questions, are we simply to accept in the name of freedom and democracy as wide a range of inequality as the fair corporate capitalism engenders? And last questions, are we morally bound to ignore the Dickens wretches which accumulate at the bottom of the economic ladder? and the overbearing and often selfish individuals who emerge at the top. So these are the questions we have to search for the answers. There were, and at the moment also, there are theorists, social theorists, political theorists, and even the philosophers who have been so fearful of the despotic results of socialism that have asked us to eschew all theories of equality. And here, let me position Tocqueville exactly in a fashion Professor Giri has talked about. He has been revived, Tocqueville has been revived because of his warnings about creating a society in which the individual becomes entrapped in a web of governmental control and therefore loses his or her civic independence. Max Weber, another German thinker, argued with Lukács against romanticized socialism and precisely predicted the despotic potentialities within the Bolshevik program that is in Russia. Hayek is another thinker, is another philosopher, warned that socialist planning, even within a democratic society, would lead us down the road to serfdom. And Karl Popper effectively leveled Marxist socialism as one of the major enemies of an open society. Today, theorists such as there are two or more thinkers I like to refer to, Nozick, N-O-Z-I-C-K, and Murray. And there are also contemporary neoconservatives who argue for a minimalist state. They are worried and skeptical about the results of state intervention of any kind in the economic and social spheres. Now, some question that automatically comes to our mind. Number one is it historically correct, however, that laissez-faire policies produce the best of all possible worlds? And second question, is it proper counter theory to socialism, the enshrinement of corporate capitalism? In order to avoid the despotism of socialism, do we wish to revive the lifestyle of Oliver Twist for a large segment of our population? And keeping the warnings about socialism presented by the many great theorists in mind, that I have referred to some of the theorists, there are still critical reasons for not dropping the idea of equality altogether. And the reasons for continuing to search for regrounding of the theory of equality are of four kinds, are fourfold. Number one, first, it has been known since the days of Aristotle. I like to refer to 4 thinkers that extreme inequality of wealth undermines the stability of democracy and drives the polity towards oligarchy or tyranny. Second, it has been known also since the days of Charles Dickens, one of the great writers in the West, and the days of the post-Vedic period in our country, in our India, that unbridled inequality of wealth undermines our ethical tradition of humanism and social justice, which must be maintained in order to modify the excesses of our parallel ethic of rugged Puritanic individualisms. And the last that I like to refer, that it is since the date of Great Depression, that the economic depression I'm referring to, that laissez-faire capitalism becomes unstable without certain forms of government interventions. And there is one more. It is now apparent that it is a frightening specter that the growth of the power of bureaucratic state and the corporate leviathan have continued up space, even where the welfare state has been severely reduced and the industrial economy deregulated. Therefore, even with the death of socialism, democracy and government by law must continue to be safeguarded from the growing power of the modern state and economy, as Tocqueville has time and again reinforced. Taking this safeguarding as preeminent, the objectionable aspects of unbridled corporate capitalism must be modified for the political, economic, and ethical reasons in order to enjoy the full freedom and also to have the equality at all spheres, in all spheres of life. Now, given the death of romantic socialism, the question becomes, that is important that we must think of what theories and programs exist or should exist so that the quest for equality within legal democratic societies is not totally lost. And here, there are three theoretical systems, respectively. I refer to one is Aristotle, another is Rawls, and the last is one economist, Keynes, that take legal democracy as a given, necessary, uncompromisable first principle. But that then attempt to moderate the extremes of wealth and power that emerge as a result of the independence of the capitalist economic sphere from governmental control. Each of these theoretical systems given by these thinkers represents what is said in theorizing critical for conception of democracy and equality. Aristotle, passingly, I'll try to bring back home some of the salient points held by these thinkers. Aristotle has given us from the world of the Greek polis the best practical solution to the problem of democracy and equality. Rawls has revised the Enlightenment social contract theories, presenting us with an updated concepts focusing on the dilemma of balancing claims for democracy and equality. And Keynes has created a best post-depression revision of capitalist theory that attempts to modify the theory's worst excesses without destroying its undergirding system of law and democracy. Now, let me a little bit explicate the ideas of these thinkers. Aristotle's theory of proportionate equality with a middle class majority remains the basis for the modern day non-socialist theories. Aristotle's compromise between pure communism and uncontrolled capitalism may be still the most sophisticated and practical solution to the problem of equality ever created, and it's applicable even within the context of modern society. Now, Aristotle's theory of proportionate equality was intended to institutionalize alongside his theory of the ethical golden mean, which in social structural terms for Aristotle, the principle of a middle-class majority. Aristotle presents us with a specific theoretical and policy formulations, the goals of which are to expand the size and prosperity of the middle class, upgrade the poor to middle class status, and encourage the rich class to give their wealth for the common good. Within this context, his critique of pure communism and his theory of proportionate equality take on a different meaning. Now, Rawls' theory is derived from philosophical foundation of enlightenment. It embodies the intent of enlightenment thinkers as to the primacy of law, the limitation of power, and the free reign of economic processes. However, his principle of justice and fairness through an extension of enlightenment logic, enlightenment logic itself creates a modification of laissez-faire theory designed to ameliorate its worst effects. Rawls goes back to the state of nature and attempts to re-establish not only the theory of equality, but also the theory of democracy, and discarding the Enlightenment first premise that certain inalienable rights are granted by natural law as unacceptable to modern rationalist thinkers. Rawls creates a new basis for political rights and economic justice. Excuse me. Logically consistent with its first premise, namely the veil of ignorance. And behind the veil of ignorance, would anyone establish a society in which they would likely be politically oppressed or economically impoverished? Rawls thinks not and goes on to establish principles by which a society could be maintained so as to minimize the bitter phenomenon. Rawls' theory may be chosen because it once reaffirms the Enlightenment principles of limitations of power and government by law, while modifying the Enlightenment tendency to legitimate oligarchy over democracy and to estimate individualistic competitive market economies as the magical provider of a prosperous and just world. Accepting the legal democratic polity as a given, worth preserving at all costs, as with Aristotle and Rawls. Keynes, another economist, presents us with an economic program designed to produce greater equality while at the same time increasing the efficiency of capitalistic industrial system. Then results of Keynes' program were to be creation of increased equality and economic stability within a framework of law and democracy. Now, the reduction of extreme inequalities of wealth and explanation of middle class helps to stabilize and strengthen legal democracy. That in fact, such processes tend to reduce oligarchic and tyrannical tendencies in polity and help to safeguard democracy from bureaucratic authoritarianism and meritocratic elitism as well. So this is what I'm talking about, the different kinds of theories in reference to great thinkers and programs established to engender a greater degree of equality can improve the functioning of technocratic capitalist industrial economy. And insofar as the experience of Soviet Russia, which has already disintegrated long back, Soviet-style centralized bureaucratic socialist economies are already finished. Modern corporate capitalism is hardly functioning as a laissez-faire model. Thus, some of the programs intended to produce equality also create a greater degree of economic stability and industrial growth. So under this backdrop, drawing upon these theoretical ideas, now I move to the second part of my communications. I will speak on Indian democracy. I'll confine my entire discussions very briefly on Indian democracy on the basis of my experiences and also the studies conducted, as I've spoken to you, some of the great social scientists. If you look into the history, Indian democracy, right after the independence, has oscillated between political flexibility and self-righteous ruthlessness over the last 7 decades. Despite its myriad flaws, Indian democracy, it's a fact, has worked on the whole and brought to center of politics a very large sections of populations in our country, from the peripheries and the bottom of society, and released enormous social and cultural energy. Yet, there still remains large pockets of deprivations. Then discontent and violence leading to state repressions. Now, account of this is not today's experiences. Today we are experiencing, given the fact that we are experiencing today, but this is how we have experienced even in the past. No account of external connections. An internal sociopathy of such violence can hide the flaws in our reason that have contributed very handsomely to these conflicts, from Nagaland and Kashmir, a recent problem in Kashmir, to Mizoram and Manipur. It has been as unending a story of violence, torture, rape, arson. Even in this part of the country that we live in, UP and Bihar, custodial deaths, disappearance, and then even bombing. There's no accident that the Indian state has always registered formally giving up 2 major instruments of terror. It has wielded torture and the death penalty. Now, in areas infested by Maoist militants too, one sees this darker side of Indian democracy unfolding. The Indian state, even if by default has pushed to the verge of extinction, large parts of 3,000-old, more than 3,000-old tribal civilization of our country that has traditionally constituted the most significant other simultaneously an altered ego, if I may say so, a disowned self and possibility for the better known, more transparent, dominant self of India. However, these facts run parallel to recurrent moments of enormous political flexibility, and to many hard-eyed political analysts look like surrender, and to others unbelievable and magical. And here I like to refer to 2 instances. Number one is of, for instance, such flexibility has allowed the likes of General Lal Denga, who led the Mizo uprisings against some time back against the Indian state, and finally died in his bed as a respected political leader, a former chief minister, and as one who had to be given a state funeral. Likewise, Indira Gandhi, not known for her capacity to compromise or her sterling commitment to democracy, did manage to sign an agreement when no one was expecting it with the Nagas after nearly 30 years with a civil war. If such moments are getting rarer, it is because in recent years, the voice of India is expanding urban middle class and hot bourgeoisie, sometimes backed by vainglorious, intellectually lazy media, has begun to play a disproportionately powerful role in defining Indian nationalism. And there are other ways of building a state that I don't like to speak on this moment of time because of paucity of time. Now, I'd like to position two great thinkers, Riku Parikh. Riku Parikh is the one who had the direct encounters with the idea of India, and he identifies two main limitations of modernist view of India. And that still rules the culture of governments even more than 70 years after independence. First, he says that India has failed to develop a coherent idea of the place of religion in public life. He traces the failure and the narrow, Austrian, impractical view of secularism with which the mainstream official culture of Indian politics works, to the violence that accompanied the birth of independent India. There is in the ruling circles a deep fear of religion. In a country where religion is a living force and has played a highly creative role during freedom movement through Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi, and another Abdul Ghaffar Khan, the country Gandhi, this in long run could not but be self-defeating. It was surprisingly, it was bound to open up a range of opportunities for the political entrepreneurs ready to exploit religion for their own purposes. This is what we are experiencing today, and to occupy the place vacated by serious politicians unwilling to touch religion. Second point that he mentions, the definition of Indianness. He says that this definition too has been unduly narrow in the culture of Indian state. And there is little recognition that regional, ethnic, and religious identities give depth and richness to Indianness. To judge by the tone of Indian pronouncements, such diversities are feared, not cherished. India is a unitary state, defying its self-restriction as a federal entity in its constitution. Parikh believes that a more open-ended self-definition, backed presumably by some pride in rather than an embarrassment about the country's immense diversity, will serve India better. And I dare say, if I may say so once again, I dare say make its rulers more sensitive to cultural and intellectual strengths that consider development, national security, and progress to be some of the dirtiest words in our lexicon, rightly or wrongly. Lexicon means vocabulary I'm talking about. Parikh then goes on to counterpose this modernist view of India against the Hindu, by which he means Hindutva view of India, and despite himself comes close to establishing correspondence between the two. Though Parikh tries to draw a clear line between the two views of India, it becomes obvious after a point that it is not easy to do so. Both visions not only share key concepts like nation state, nationality, and nation, but also grant them the same universal validity and pace-setting role in the polity. Only the concept of political modernity in Hindutva is woven around the purer 19th century imperial European ideas of state and statecraft, while the outwardly modernist theory of the state in India is tempered, rather burdened by the Gandhian heritage, which is built-in suspicion of a modern state organized around a dominant nationality, and by the growing global ambivalence towards the older, unitary, almost monolithic idea of the state. Fear of Hindutva and its concepts of the state in those subscribing to the modernist ideology of the state is ultimately the modernist fear of its own past self. As I would like to position very briefly Anthony Giddens' proposition, which he casually ventures that the globalization is what the impact of globalization I'm talking about on our state and democracy. That the globalization, instead of weakening the modern state, is strengthening it. There is some truth in this for India, where for many decades the state has been overloaded, modeling itself on the colonial state and pushing a civilizing vision of its own. The post-colonial state in India has taken over, apart from national security, a whole range of new functions, and that from representing the principles of modern scientific rationality and introducing the savages to the beauties of urban industrial civilization, and to the charms of progress, to the advancing the causes of socialism, secularism, and development. The onerous burden of carrying out these duties would have been the back of any state in the world. It is no surprise then that the Indian state looks under-organized, perpetually overworked, inefficient, and floundering. I'm sorry once again for my frank sellout, by demanding that the state set some of this baggage to become linear and meaner. Globalization may have indeed strengthened the state in some ways. On the other hand, the enormous distrust and dislike of the main functionaries of the Indian state, and they are politicians, bureaucrats, and police. They consistently reflected in a number of large-scale surveys of social and political attitudes, shows an erosion in the state's moral stature and its capacity to intervene in society with any long-term vision. India has a strong state, mainly in the sense that coercive might and economic powers of the Indian state has expanded in recent years. The power that it derives from its democratic foundation is increasingly contained by the technocratic demands of development and the moth-eaten pre-war idea of progress. Anthony Giddens, however, covers not only the changing nature of modern state, but also new developments in the global culture of politics. In the process, he has grappled with a whole range of issues, many of which probably cannot be handled within the compass of a mainframe political theory, like persons, culture, civilizations, to bring to politics their own visions of desirable societies and their own self-definitions. And these may have little to do with our favorite theories of political and social change. And these strange constructions have crucial links with what Panikkar calls the myths of a culture, and they tend to defy both history, as it has grown as a discipline since the Enlightenment, and the demands of professional political scientists and their kit bag of analytic tools. Thus, when Giddens mentions the emergence of India as a global powers, along with China as a corrective to Western dominance, he has to overlook how even within these societies, there are now powerful strengths of political awareness that neatly reproduce 19th century Europe and the rest of these societies, which have previously survived invasions, operations, oppressive regimes, radical economic changes, and major natural disasters, are now facing obsolescence, redundancy, and extinction. Globalization is a ruthless process that has taken to logical conclusion the culture of early capitalism, built on the presumption that the defeated have proved by their failure their infra-human stature, and should now be exiled to history and not pointlessly occupy our neighborhoods. The global is not necessarily the universal and globalizations. And this finally, to my mind, I'm constant to speak out that the domain of universal is inhabited not only by society that claim a monopoly on it, but also by a whole range of cultures where they have been glorified as civilization or contemptuously dismissed as historical anachronisms. And this brings us to Rumila Thapar's effort to unburden history of some of the demonic positions it has been suffering from the recent times in India. I will not go into that details because this will consume much of the time. Now, I like to focus on the point that even more important point is very important, is a question that has haunted some in recent years. All of us are being affected. Number one, is history exactly as Romila Thapar has been talking about the Indian situation. Is history as a discipline equipped to handle all the human past? Or do we have to prioritize the construction of our past to in so-called our historical cultures that depend more on folklores, legends, epics, myths, grandparents' tales, shared memories handed down over the generations for invoking a past where human passions, heart, imagination, and ethics have a place? The next generation of historians may will turn to subjects like a comparative study of West, a cultural history of water, and cultural history of demography, and so on and so forth. So, but at the same time, at some point of time, they may also have to go beyond history to recover other forms of the past that many humble cultures have protected in the interest of the common masses in in our country. Now, over the last 200 years almost, India has learned to live with history, but it has been an easy coexistence. History has never been central to Indian self-definition. And even the popular word for history in many Indian languages that we are talking about, itihas in Hindi, is traditionally used for its major epics. A large part of India, I'm afraid, may remain outside the ambit of history unless we manage to break the back of some of our more fused, increasingly rebellious little cultures and develop it into a fully industrialized, unapologetically modern superpower to the applause of large parts of the world. And now, this is my last I like to speak on. This is some of the comments by my teacher. I like to bring back home Professor Yogen Singh. So beautifully, he has talked about some of the potential structural inconsistencies. He says, I quote from his book. I'll take one at a time. The major potential sources of breakdown in the Indian process of development and democracy may in one form or the other be attributed to structural inconsistencies. He says democratization without a spread of civic culture. Number two, bureaucratization without commitment to universalistic norms. Number three, rise in media participation. And aspiration without proportionate increase in resources and distributive justice. And mobilization of a welfare ideology without diffusion in social structure and implementation as a social policy. The last that we are talking about, the modernization of democracy without meaningful changes in the social stratification system of powers. And this one important point that he refers to Guna middle. The Indian situation has its own limitations because of its peculiar historicity. He says, he quotes Guna middle, nationalism and democratic institutions themselves have grown in a structurally uneven form in our country, in India. In Europe, strong independent state with a fairly ineffective effective government and a common pattern of law enforcement preceded nationalism and both preceded democracy. But in our country, in India, democratic ideology, if not reality, due to a special historicity, preceded a strong and independent state and effective government, and this is further complicated by onslaught of nationalism. This uneven historicity goes along with economic development dependence of India over the developed part of the world, and slow rate of economic growth and still slower pace of institutional changes. In India, which has a more viable size of intellectual and middle classes, necessity for democracy, planned economic growth has not made as deep as impact towards liberalizing the structural bottlenecks for modernizations as should have been expected. That's why democracy is not matured as we are expecting. And according to Middle, India's soft state policy may be one of the reasons for this kind of thing. Thank you very much. Once again, I express my great gratitude to Professor Anand Giri and Mr. The organizer. I'm forgetting his name at the moment. His name is Randhir Saab, and the most honorable Professor Anand Kumarji and the other audience. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Professor Pandey. You have really held our hands with love and great devotion to scholarship and a kind of an experiential critique. And you have really brought so many issues together. And we are indeed grateful to you. And out of many issues you have raised, for example, history and limits of history and pluralization of history, ideas of India, limits of secularism, and going beyond history also brings us the whole calling of transcendence, So when we are talking about democracy and equality, there is a reality and invitation of transcendence as well, that modern conceptions of democracy and equality do not always invoke. But Professor, not only Romila Thakur's work on history, but also Professor Gobind Chandra Pandey's work on history.
Yes.
And how that kind of opening of history, and as Ashish Nandi, I was also remembering Ashish Nandi, when you continuously brought the problem of the defeated. But those who are defeated, they are still animated by the quest of not only survival, but embodying their own critique and creativity. So thank you, Professor Pandey. And now with eagerness, we look forward to being enriched by Professor Anand Kumar. Professor Anand Kumar, please.
Thank you so much, my friend, Professor Anand Giri. It was very enjoyable to hear Professor Ajit Pandey, because he took us for an excursion of ideas and concepts around the central point of democracy and equality. It was very well prefaced by Professor Anand Giri, where he took us deep into Tocquevillian world of democracy and how he had a great appreciation in a comparative manner about American democracy compared to the French scenario of French political culture. I'm also very happy that Professor Ajit Pandey ended his presentation by taking us to Professor Yogendra Singh, who was a very optimist analyst of dynamics of democracy and social change within the frame of democracy and development, democracy and traditions, democracy and modernization. So Yogendra Singh used to make a very special use of the notion of failure of success. So when you look at the Indian scenario, it looks like a case where we are witnessing failure of success of Indian people in engaging with democracy and equality. The Indian engagement with democracy was around federalization, around parliamentary democracy, around multi-party system. And in all these 75 years, but for the tragic interruption of the emergency years, we have been moving gradually and steadily towards the path of parliamentary democracy. But then parliamentary democracy has its own limitations. And one of the limitations has to do with the idea of representation. We have to look at the theories of representation to make sense of the crisis of Indian democracy at this point of time. Similarly, when you look at the dream of equality, there was a project where the state was going to engage with society to promote equality in the name of justice. And the idea of justice had three dimensions: political justice, economic justice, and social justice. Because of the deepness of Indian freedom struggle, there was a general consensus for political justice, that is political equality. But not much consensus was built about the challenges of social equality, that is social justice, and economic equality. So we have an incomplete project of equality where political equality was growing without simultaneous growth of the idea or the vision or the institutions and the values promoting social and economic equality. I want to take you to Professor Ajit Pandey's optimism about future and pessimism about this dying dream of socialism. He has been very rightly critical of the collapse of the idea of socialism mediated through bureaucracy, through party, through centralization, as it manifested in the Soviet model. Today, nobody wants to connect the present Russian realities with the very recent communist engineering which took place in the name of socialism in Soviet Union. If we don't want to go to Soviet Union, who will like to go to China? China has become the great engine of corporate capitalism or global capitalism for last 40 years. And China is today one of the leading nation states in the world of capitalist development. We want to go the Chinese way in many ways. So to go further with Professor Ajit Pandey, let us put 2 or 3 questions for further conversation, including bringing in Professor Ajit Pandey. First of all, who needs democracy today in India? Because we are talking about democracy and equality in India. Because there was not 100% support for the idea of democracy, even when the constitution was being built. None of the princely states wanted democracy. None of the heads of the religious communities wanted democracy. None of the regional magnates wanted democracy, but democracy came through because it looked like the most practical common denominator for a post-colonial political system. Then similarly, we have today some gainers and losers of democracy. The people who look at the idea of representation through meritocracy, through open competition, feel like blaming democracy for the system of reservations. So there's a subtle layer of people in our society, in our political community, who do not like democracy, but they are compelled to live with democracy, and therefore they are there inside without being committed to the idea of democratization. So I'd like to suggest that we must look at this question of who needs democracy today and who does not like democracy. And by virtue of the validity of this question, let us look at India as a nation state or as a social formation, which is going through a process of democratization. If you change the institutional framework into a processual framework and look at the dynamics of democratization, then you will be able to get a little better picture of this today, how far it is getting democratized in political sphere, in social sphere, in economic sphere, in this part or that part of the country. So from democracy, let us discuss the process of democratization for a little more organic view of the reality. Because nearly 1/6 of India, including some of the districts of Orissa, Andhra Pradesh, Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, do not enjoy democracy. There is actually explicit police Raj. If you remove CRPF from those areas cannot be managed by the regular administrative structures which generally govern cities like Bombay, Delhi, Madras, Bangalore. They are called left-wing extremism affected districts. Similarly, if you go to the northeastern states, I was very happy that Ajit discussed Lal Denga and Indira Gandhi. Northeastern states feel like periphery of the Indian Union, and they think that we are being ill-treated. We are an extended colony and we need our justice. And this justice is not possible in this frame of parliamentary democracy because we get 2, 3, 4 MPs, where Bihar, UP gets 80 MPs. Who will care for us? So we'll remain tail of these mainstream provinces, these mainstream states. So the first questions or set of questions has to be, who needs democracy today? Is there any change in the stakeholders, or they are the same people who needed democracy yesterday or who may need democracy tomorrow? Second question will be same for equality. Who demands equality? Because those who were proponents of equality became internally fragmented. This classical experience is very well illustrated by the status of some parties which were wedded to equality. For example, the Republican Party of India of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, or the Sanयुक्त Socialist Party of India of Dr. Ram Manohar Lohia. How many fractions, how many fragments are there of the Republican Party of India or Socialist Party of India, or why? It is not individualism. It is because of different desires, different dreams. You can change your destination in the middle of your journey. You want to go to Chennai, but in the middle, somebody advises you that why do you go to Chennai? It's very hot. Why don't you get down to a little cooler place? And then you start asking, oh, where is the next cooler city on the way? And they say, it may be Goa, it may be Mount Abu, it may be Ooty. And you get down there. So this is how the idea of equality is being interrogated, being engaged, being utilized by Indian masses. Some are using it for politics of identity. Some are still in the quest of equality. For example, my friend Wilson Bejwala, who is working with sanitation workers, still is dreaming of India where there is chance for equality. But the leaders of Bahujan Samaj Party, who also use the same vote bank of Dalits, are not committed to the idea of equality. They are more committed for graded inequality, more inclusion, more participation, more representation. So we must ask these two questions. And I'm very happy that it started with Tocqueville, with help of Professor Anand Giri. And then we came to John Rawls, we came to Yogen Singh, we came to Bhikkhu Parikh, we came to Romila Thalper, with help of Professor Ajit Pandey. That is a good style to introduce us to these great minds. And at the same time, there's also a great way of exciting us to think beyond these people, beyond these masters. I want to stop here. Otherwise, it will become like an independent alternative presentation by me, for which I must wait for another opportunity. Congratulations, Ajit, and congratulations, Anantji. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Anand Kumar. And you really brought many deep issues to the fore. And the primary issue is who really needs democracy today, and who really demands for equality. And your concluding reference to Wilson and Bahujan Samaj Party is also so deep indeed, because in the name of the marginalized, what is really happening, and how the whole politics of equality has really the political manifestation, as we see in forces like Bahujan Samaj Party. And no wonder that Bahujan Samaj Party in the recent electoral battle has not been able to get even 1 or 2 more seats. And also we need to remember, since you lived in Banaras and Professor Pandey lives in Lucknow, the kind of monumentalization of the cause of equality, like the building of statues and everything. Now there is the monumentalization of Varanasi in terms of corridors and everything. But what is happening to quality of life, the condition of water and everything? So as always, Professor Anand Kumar, you really bring us to our soil, our mother earth, the reality of where we are. At the same time, you link it to many layers of theorization and reflection. Thank you. So now let us hold the hands of both Professor Ajit Pandey and Professor Anand Kumar and join in this discussion. So I invite comments, reflections, and questions, please. And we'll take a few questions together, maybe 4 to 5, so that we have more time for discussion. And then we would invite reflections, please. So as we are preparing for, I request friends to take 2 to 3 minutes to share their thoughts. I see Professor Sudha co-present with us. Sudha, please. Okay, we have Professor B.B. Malik with us. Professor Malik. Okay, we have Dr. Birendra Suna with us. Dr. Suna, please.
Sir, thank you so much. In fact, after long, if I heard my professor, Professor Anand Kumar sir, and happy to see both of you on screen. As sir has elaborated from northeast to south and west, okay. So in this case, I have some observation that where the Adivasis are, can be settled in this case, because when the parliamentary democracy is there, so if the majorities are Adivasis, so in that case, how we can put in a democratic system? Because when UP is getting 80 constituency, that's MP seats, whereas a state like ours, Odisha, is only 21. So in that case, we have a number of Adivasis in our area. So how it can be settled? That would be one of my small observation that sir can respond. Thank you, sir.
We would wait for a few more thoughts to be with us. I see Professor Malik, please. Hello, Professor Malik.
Yes.
Yeah, you can put your video on also. We can see you.
Are you able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yeah,
you.
I have a just small query pertaining to this. What will be the future GSP politics? So I'm actually wondering that what will be the future of GSP politics? Just this is small query from Professor Anand Kumar sir. That's all from my side.
Okay, thank you, Professor Malik. Nice to see you. Yes, and other friends, please. Let me see. Now we can listen to Gyan Luigi, please. Then Professor Bhagyasri Wakhare, then Randhir, then Minati in this round, please.
I think there is a hand raised by Professor Devendra Biswal.
Okay, Professor Biswal, please.
Sir, yes. Good evening to all, sir, respected teachers. And I have a query because the Ministry of Culture has started a project on the name of Purity of Indian Race. In this context, Indian society is already divided on many lines. It is of caste, religion, different lines. And here, what would be the, because today we are drawing a line between the insiders and the outsiders. Insiders are the Adivasis or indigenous people or the Hindus in that sense. And the outsiders are impure. It is assumed by the Ministry and the present society. So what would be the implications of this racial purity concept? That is my query, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Biswal. You can put your video on. We can see you for a moment. Lovely to see you after many years. So now, Gyan Luigi, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope I am audible. It was
Yes.
really excellent. And well, the first impression, the first idea which came to my mind is as regards the problem of democracy and equality, that one of the criticism, the most, in my opinion, most aggressive or decided criticism of the participation, of the influence of money, wealth oligarchies in the public affairs is made quite interestingly, not perhaps by a socialist tradition, but by a liberal tradition, because it is Adam Smith himself who, in The Wealth of Nations, says, pay attention, be careful that the exponents of wealth, the tycoons, do not participate too much in the administration of the public affairs, and on the contrary, try to hold them as far as possible from the public affairs, because they would distract the public affairs to their own interest. That is, it is, in my opinion, very interesting, this criticism of Adam Smith, which is in the fourth book of the, if I'm not mistaken, of The Wealth of Nations, because Adam Smith belongs to the liberal tradition, not to the socialist one, not to the democratic one, so to speak. And in spite of that, is really very, very decided about the judgment of the peril and dangers which the wealth oligarchies could represent for democracy in general. This is one of the points which came to my mind while listening the wonderful contributions. And well, I think that in general, one of the danger now for democracy in general, and it can be applied to any country, to some countries more than other ones, but I think it is a general peril, is to the tendency to transform, the strategy to transform democracy in a kind of technocracy with abolition of sovereignty. That is, there is a precise content which a country should do, and therefore the parties should adapt themselves to these contents without making any objection. That is, the program is already given. This is really the end of democracy, or it is at least a great danger for this. This is to be seen very, very clearly in Europe now, but not only in Europe. There is a famous expression, well, there is the automatic pilot, therefore election has no great importance. Elections and anyway the use of the sovereignty has no great importance, the use of democracy, because the program is already given. Therefore, people should adapt themselves to what is already established. And in my opinion, this is now the greatest danger, both for democracy and for equality, because from technocracy, there is no way. From technocracy, oligarchies, wealth oligarchies will have all to gain, and the subaltern classes will have all to lose. That is, the victims will be, as usual, the subaltern classes, the poor classes, or the middle poor classes. I think that, well, one question was very impressive for me: who needs democracy today? I think that we are nearly arrived at a condition in which democracy needs democracy, because if the technocracy, the development of technocracy, the strategy of technocracy proceeds in this way, democracy itself will be at risk. I think, however, that there is also hopes, that is, there are positive aspects in the sense that some constitutions are stronger than other one. And in particular, I think that the Constitution of India has more immunization against these problems, these dangers, due and thanks to the directive principle of state policy, which pose clear limitations to technocracies, to technicalities, and so on and so forth. That is, there are some constitutions which are more exposed, and other constitutions which, in my opinion, have much strength of immunization. And India is, in my opinion, in this sense, much fortunate. And so I thank you very much for the wonderful contribution. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Gian Luigi. Now, Minati, please.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Good evening, everyone.
And you can also
I-
put your video on. Our friends can
No,
listen.
this it is network is little slow, so
Okay.
if I put the body, it might not talk. So I thank Professor Ajit Pandey and Professor Anand Kumar for such a brilliant presentation. I learned so many things, and let me confess one thing. From my study days, I never liked political science. I mean, and now when I grew up little bit, how I find that political things are entangled with our related to our social life, our social life, clinical life, and the spiritual life, even day-to-day life. So slowly, I'm learning so many things. So I don't have any question today. So I like this presentation very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Minati. And now we are coming to just the first round. And now, Randhir, please.
Thank you, Professor Giri. And it was indeed very excellent presentation by Professor Ajit Pandey and democracy. Of course, it's a very contested concept. And Dr. Girian once said that democracy is like love. It only works if everyone has a voice. But when we read the democratical theory, we are told that social manifestation of authority, inequality, and hierarchy require democracy as a political solution. There is a problem, because I am a great admirer of Rajani Kothari, who wrote an excellent book called State Against Democracy in Search of Human Government. We don't give emphasis on non-party political fronts in India. Be it, we can see we have just witnessed the Kisan movement and student movement. It was civil society who empowered voice. So what could be the possibility to empower those non-party political fronts? This is my one question. Second question is about majority democracy. And I think there are two factors which are responsible for majority democracy. One is the feeling that people have equal rights, equal say in making group decisions. This is a problem. Second, a coercive apparatus capable of enforcing those decisions. So what could be the possibility? Because Ambedkar also somehow, underlined this very serious problem of majority democracy. How we can inculcate constitutional morality. When, Professor Anand Kumar just told that who talks about democracy. Even the law student whom I teach, I do not find they have constitutional morality to support reservation. So what could be the possibility of civic learning and how, our civil society affairs can deal this issue? So thank you so much.
Randhir, and we can go up to, if possible, till 7 p.m. No, Randhir?
Yes, 6:45.
45. So that is lovely. So now let me invite Professor Ajit Pandey and then Professor Anand Kumar to kindly share their thoughts. So Professor Ajit Pandey, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes, please.
Yes, actually, that two questions he has put before us: that who needs democracy, who who does not require democracy in this part of the world or any part of the world. Actually, it's a question of altruism. If those who are imbued with the altruistic ideas, certainly they with the very meaning of democracy, time and again crave for the democratic ideas spilling over the entire structure, diffused structure. This basic ingredients of democracy should remain all time to come diffused throughout the system or through all the structures of a society that we live in. So for that, you have to be altruistic. You must have a love for humanity. I'm reminded this moment of time, the great statement of Professor Bertrand Russell, that is in his preface that he has written in his autobiography, when he speaks of that my life is guided by three passions: love for God, thirst for knowledge, and pity for the tortured and oppressed people of the world. He says that first two, love for God and thirst for knowledge, always took me to the imaginative or temporal world. But the moment my eyes caught sight of the suffering masses on this earth, I came back to this earth, this temporal world. I tried to alleviate the problems. The more I tried to alleviate the problems, the more I became entangled. This is how a feeling of the individual, and this kind of feeling of the individual can be an individual who is altruistic in his orientations. So my answer is that unless you are moralist with, be pregnant with the altruistic ideas, it's not possible for you to invite the democracy to come and reign supreme over the entire system insofar as the politics or political system is concerned. I remember Professor Kumar Asian drama, perhaps second volume, when he talks of the soft state policy, Indian soft state policy after independence particularly. And this is the reason enough for inhibiting the leadership, Indian leadership, from going to the root of the problems that is the introduction of basic changes in the institutional structures of India. Most of the political leaders, barring a few, I don't blame all, but most of them were not much concerned with this bringing about certain structural changes, certain changes or introduction of basic changes in the institutional structures of society. And as a result, what happened? The egalitarian structure of society continued. In Indian society, this included slowly and gradually inequality, egalitarian structures, elements started including into the Indian social system, and it continued to grow. And finally, the features of inequality consolidated. So those who are socialized in this kind of tradition, where the corruptions, the exploitation, the subordinity, they take as a passion of their life. They never, as a matter of fact, enjoy the democracy in a real sense of the technology, where the state remains committed in an altruistic fashion to help the people who come day in and day out, who come in any kind of crisis, be it an individual or the social crisis. This is one, sir, I understand. Before before I my answer, I dare to speak and submit before Professor Anand Kumarji that all of the theoretical models that I've referred to, starting from Tocqueville, like Anand Giri has beautifully explained, to many more thinkers, Rawls and Socrates and many more people. I understand all of them suffer from one limitation or the other. To me, a theory cannot be relevant to any kind of cross crisis that emanates for the democratic structure system theoretically, if it is formulated in terms of the individual institutional experiences or the factors, or in terms of the historiography, monography factors. What is required that there should be a situation particularly created by intelligentsia or the people who have certain kinds of scholarship or people who have certain kinds of sociological imagination. They are competent enough to create a situation when these two dramatically opposite factors At one hand, individual institutional factors, on the other hand, historiographic, monographic factors. Where in this situation they can marry, given the fact they are diametrically opposed, they can marry with each other. So unless you, as you come forward, you intellectuals, it's not possible for you to expect to have any kind of theoretical structures who can answer back to all kind of problems in the population is first this moment of time. So this is my understanding, and we must look into that. And I agree with Professor Anand Kumar ji, though it's very short, descriptions, but he has a very vast experiences both in the social and political life. And I request the organizer of the institution of this kind of symposium to invite Professor Anand Kumar to speak on the same topic, and that too basing on his own experience, right from his student life to the life that he is being called as the top social scientists of the world or of our country. This is my understanding. So ultimately, I understand that democracy theoretically is liked by everybody, but the problem is even in the democracy, you are searching for a space where the space helps you out at individual, even out of turn. I reference maybe matter of the Article 14 of the Constitutions. There are some flaws in our constitutions also. I will that equality before law and equal protection of law. These two phrases appear to be carrying the similar kind of meaning, but you go for the the analysis or descriptions as per the explanations given by the High Court, Supreme Court judges, both carry the different kind of meanings, like equal protection of law in equal circumstances and unequal protection of law in unequal circumstances. And this will not suit the people who are very selfish, who are exploitative, or who are under the influence of subordinate ideas. So this is my understanding. Thank you very much, Professor Giri. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Pandey. Professor Ananda Kumar, please.
Thank you, Professor Ajit Pandey, for taking care of several questions. I took note of 6 interventions, and I'll go by the same order. Dr. Biren Sunna, I felt very happy to see him. I want to congratulate him for his success in joining the faculty of this new University of Orissa. He wanted to ask about the Adivasi question. And the future of Adivasi question is not in centralization, but in decentralization. Because luckily they are still that part of India which is still very communitarian, very territorial, and very group oriented. But given the present frame of electoral system and party system in a country of 130 crore people with their population of 8 to 10 crores, they become marginal. And if they are not condemned to be marginal for all the times to come, they must support the movement of decentralization as it was proposed through the constitutional amendments of 73rd and 74th, and later on was further elaborated through 96th amendment of the Constitution, Apna Gaon, Apna Raj movement of Dr. B.D. Sharma and many others. Dr. Malik asked about future of Indian politics, and it's a pregnant question. Whatever we tried to do, we created this present, which was our future. Now, whatever Dr. Malik and Dr. Randhir will do now will determine the future profile of India and Indian democracy and the Indian journey of equality. But Dr. Malik, you should be very sure that you will be more fortunate because you will have more capacity, more capability, and more cooperation from your generation than we were able to enjoy. And we were more lucky than the generation of Nehru and Gandhi and Patel. They had lesser support, lesser resources, many more challenges than my generation. And your generation will be a little better off. But no, there will be no easy way. You have to fight your way and you have to hold your values very tight. Dr. Biswal was asking about unity of Indian race. See, the idea of unity of Indian race is again a poetic idea, is good for a good poetry, but not good anthropology, not good sociology. A good sociology will tell that India is a reality which is based upon this universal natural principle of unity in diversity. There are certain principles which unite us, but there are many realities which divide us, but divide not in antagonistic sense, in some kind of autonomous sense. So let us not take diversities as antagonistic, as opposed to unity. Unity at a higher level may tolerate diversity at a lower level. Just like in a family, we are part of a family and we are children of the same mother and father. We are separate from each other, but we are united when it comes to our parents. So this kind of unity and diversity work with each other, and we have to work it further, particularly with reference to the idea of Indian civilization or the idea of India. Then we had this scholar Segarerba. He talked about liberal tradition, which was a good input. He also pointed to the problem of sovereignty. See, the problem of globalization is problem of sovereignty of nation states. And there is a ding-dong battle between the forces of globalization, which are corporate and middle classes, and the forces of nation building or nationalism, which are based upon local market, local resources, local economy, local culture, local politics. So there is a tension between identity politics, which is nowadays inclined towards national democracies, and globalization, which is going for global governance, global structures. And this tension has to be negotiated democratically. There has to be an idea of federal democracy, which includes a layer of globality as well, and another layer of ethnicity or regionality or locality to accommodate the questions like tribes, regions, languages. And secondly, he also talked about technology versus sovereignty and election. Election is a big pain for everybody, including those who win the elections. But election is the only solution for the problem of legitimacy at the moment. It's a very defective solution. The other day, Randhir organized a talk about how bad is our election system, how defective is our legitimation process. But thank God that we still have a working legitimation process. Otherwise, it will be a situation of Hobbesian war of all against all. जिसका लाठी उसका भैंस, भैंस एक ही है, लाठी बहुत है, तो एक दूसरे का माथा फोड़ेंगे, भैंस किसी के पकड़ में नहीं आएगी, भैंस दूसरा कोई पकड़ ले जाएगा. So we have to look at these, what you call logistical aspects of earlier formation of democracy with which we are living, and the new demands of governance which are related with globalization and corporate and finance capital. Now I come to Dr. Miniti. I think she did not like political science as a student because she did not like politicians. Politicians and political science are two different realities. Politicians come from another planet, Devalok, and politics is part of our planet, Gyanalok. So let us not confuse the two. And Miniti, you must continue to take interest in politics and political science, because both are organic for our survival and our well-being. The last question was about Dr. Randhir, and he was asking about this situation where non-party actors may become more prominent. This was the dream of Indian national movement's Gandhi tradition. This is the dream of libertarians. This is the dream of anarchists. And this has to be given due respect. Now, how do we make it strong? There are three passages to citizen power. One is more and more decentralization. More centralization, you need more mega structures like political parties and other corporate bodies, which can envelop millions of people through a mechanism of representation. And then desh ka neta kaisa ho, aapke jaisa ho. This kind of symbolization of masses is possible only when you have large structures. If you decentralize, then local communities, local bodies, civil society, Tocquevillian and voluntary associations, they become more important. So decentralization. Second is participatory democracy. If we create a mechanism of, as we say, checking each other, then citizen power becomes more important than it is today, as it is represented by PIL. Look at this PIL power. It's an ordinary citizen. He or she may not be known even in the mohalla in which he or he lives, but he or she puts a prayer under citizens' right to information, then goes to Supreme Court, and then even President of India is obliged to say what he was eating yesterday, what he'll be eating tomorrow. Prime Minister of India is obliged to say how much money has been collected in Prime Minister Fund, etc., etc. So such constitutional provisions which Dr. Ajit Pandey was talking about, Article 14, Article 19, have to be strengthened a little more. And thirdly, the problem of citizenship building. We are not engaged in citizenship building for a long time now. It was a hegemonic project of Indian National Congress when they were in power till Nehru's time. After that, we have left that process to God or to dogs. Nobody cares for citizenship building. And therefore, the idea of non-party actors, which is contingent upon the idea of citizenship, has to be reinvented. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you so much, Professor Anand Kumar. And this concluding reference to citizenship, building citizenship, cultivating citizenship, also brings us to the fundamental question of the limitation of an exclusively political view of citizenship. Because in modernity, though citizenship operates in the context of civil society, you are referring to that. But the very production of citizenship in modern state is primarily political. Therefore, your proposal of a federal polity, a federal democracy with layers of globality and locality, also calls for a fundamental reconstitution, rethinking of the discourse and practice of citizenship, and therefore cultivating citizenship in a way not only as political subjects but also as moral subjects. The idea of being citizen of the earth, but we are not just citizens of the earth, but we are children of Mother Earth in that sense. Therefore, how do we cultivate practices of belonging, our own rights and responsibilities, which includes the political, but also the transcendence of the political. So many things that we can really, maybe you would like to share one or two thoughts about it, please, Professor Anand Kumar.
Professor Anand Giri knows how to increase participation and intensify engagement. No, Anandji, this is a very important topic, and as Ajit suggested, yes, you must come back again and again with this kind of audience. I can see that even after an hour and a half, there are 46 people from different parts of the country. It is a great testimony to your organizing initiative. There is need to discuss democracy a little more closely with Indian experience, because Indian experience is a unique experiment in humanity. Such a large scale of togetherness was never attempted in such difficult circumstances. So I, being a member of a generation which was angry generation, which did not like Nehruvian projects, which protested against Indira Gandhi, which doesn't like Sri Narendra Modi either. But so we are people who do not like anybody, but we like to like somebody which is out there in the imagination, a Gandhi, a Marx, or no, others. So the idea of democracy as it has evolved in post-colonial world, more unsuccessfully than successfully, has to be given a comparative perspective to understand the genius of Indian people, their capacity to tolerate each other, to go with each other, to fight and still work and be united. But for one partition of India, which was more of a colonial project than national project in 47, Indians have remained by and large together, though we came to breaking points on many occasions. But I think the credit goes to the political community, the opposition parties, the constitution, and of course, the people of India. So Indian democracy has to be engaged for further understanding. There is very little time given to understand India in Indian terms. And that's where we can bring in our comparative sociological advantage to make sense of many, many things which are not still very well understood. And second, about the idea of equality. I think Professor Anand Giri, you know very well, but I must repeat that idea of equality is more pronounced in the vision, in the imagination of those who are victims of inequality. And more unequal people, less attraction for equality. They want justice. There is a great gap between justice and equality. Somehow Indian social movements have moved from movement for equality to movement for social justice. And mind it, social justice only, whereas Mandal Commission also insisted on both social and economic justice. But the new elite is not very attracted to the idea of economic justice, whereas justice is total: economic, political, social, spiritual. So the idea of equality has to be again brought into focus. Let us not bury it with the dead experiment of Soviet socialism or Chinese socialism or Nehruvian socialism. Let us keep it alive and growing. Thank you, my dear.
Thank you, Professor Anand Kumar. And just a linking thought is, as Professor Pandey was kind of talking about the death of romantic socialism, but for any project of equality, we also need a continued, work of romance in that sense, that love. And that is the foundational nurturing of the society that we are in and the alternative that we want to realize. So now I invite Minati, please, to offer a poem or a song of thanks, please, quickly, Minati.
Okay, that poetry I can read, but there is no time, I believe, but I can say a vote of thanks. Okay, I Minati Pradhan on the behalf of Vishwaneedam Swadhyaya Sochakra and the Vishwaneedam Center for Asian Blossoming, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to Professor Ajit Pandey for being the chief speaker for our today's session. Hello, am I audible?
Yes, please, you are audible.
Yeah, I also offer our vote of thanks with immense pleasure to Dr. Anand Kumar sir for his very beautiful insightful deliberation and explanations and answering all the questions very patiently. I thank Dr. Birendra Shuna and Dr. Birendra Vishwa, Professor Gan Luigi for their active participation and asking questions and all. I forgot to thank our moderator, Professor Anand Kumar Giri, for arranging those beautiful sessions for our deeper and very meaningful learning. I would like to thank all the participants who listened us very carefully and participated. And at the last, not the least, I would like to thank our convener, Randhir Kumar Gautam, for arranging and executing this type of webinars very regularly and very successful. And thank you all. Pardon me if I have forgotten anyone. Thank you. Thank you all.